We begin tonight in Knoxville, Tennessee, where today jurors heard shocking details of a gruesome murder and mutilation of a couple that was just about to start a new chapter in their life. Prosecutors say the killer was their son, and the motive was money.
Thanksgiving weekend is supposed to be quiet. Family comes home, food is left in the refrigerator, dishes sit in the sink, and by Monday morning, everyone returns to normal life. But on November 28, 2016, normal life did not return to a house on Golden View Lane in Knoxville, Tennessee. Lisa Guy had not shown up for work. That was not like her. She was responsible, dependable, and close to the people around her. When a welfare check was requested, deputies arrived at the home expecting a worried but ordinary call. Maybe someone was sick. Maybe there had been an accident. Maybe Lisa and her husband, Joel Guy Sr., had simply failed to answer the phone. What officers found inside that house became one of the most disturbing crime scenes Knox County investigators had ever processed. Joel and Lisa Guy were not missing. They were dead. Their remains were found inside the home, and the scene suggested not only murder, but planning, cleanup, and an attempt to destroy evidence. The suspect was not a stranger. It was not a burglar. It was not someone from outside the family. Investigators would soon focus on their adult son, Joel Michael Guy Jr. He had come home for Thanksgiving from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. His parents were preparing for retirement. They had sold their Knoxville home. They were planning a new chapter. And according to prosecutors, that new chapter came with one decision their son could not accept. They were going to stop financially supporting him. What followed was not a sudden argument that got out of control. Prosecutors said it was something far colder. A planned attack, a written list, store receipts, surveillance videos, chemical supplies, and a notebook that the state would later call the Book of Premeditation. This is the case of Joel Guy Jr., a son who came home for Thanksgiving and left behind a house no one involved in the investigation would ever forget. Before the case became known for its forensic horror, it was the story of two people who had built a life together. Joel Guy Sr. and Lisa Guy lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. They were at the point in life where many parents begin to slow down, make retirement plans, and imagine what the next years might look like, without the pressure of full-time work. The couple had recently sold their Knoxville home and purchased a family home in Surgoinsville. They had a deadline to move out. Their lives were changing, but the change was supposed to be hopeful. Family members described Thanksgiving 2016 as meaningful because it was likely the last holiday gathering at the Knoxville house. The home held years of memories, and relatives came together before Joel and Lisa moved into retirement. Joel Guy Jr. was their son. At the time, he was 28 years old and living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He had spent years in school and had been supported by his parents well into adulthood. Witnesses later testified that Joel and Lisa were preparing to end that financial support after retirement. They had helped him for years, but retirement meant their budget would change, and they expected him to stand on his own. To most families, that conversation would be difficult, maybe emotional, maybe tense, but it would be normal. Parents cannot support an adult child forever. For prosecutors, this was the motive. Joel Guy Jr. was not just visiting for Thanksgiving. He was walking into a situation where the life he had depended on was about to be cut off. The money, the support, the safety net, all of it was ending. And in the days before the killings, investigators would later find that he had already been buying items the state said were connected to the crime. That is what makes this case so chilling. The horror inside the home did not begin on the day deputies opened the door. According to prosecutors, it began earlier, in stores, on receipts, on surveillance cameras, and inside a notebook. The most important detail in the case was not a weapon. It was money. Joel Guy Jr. had been financially supported by his parents for years. He was an adult, but according to testimony, he was still relying on them for basic support. His parents were nearing retirement, and retirement changed the equation. They were selling the house. They were leaving Knoxville. Their income was changing. And multiple witnesses said they had discussed the fact that they could no longer keep paying for their son's life. That decision appears ordinary from the outside, but to prosecutors, it explained everything that happened next. They argued that Joel Jr. saw his parents not as people beginning a new stage of life, but as the obstacle between him and money. If they stopped supporting him, he would be forced into a reality he had avoided for years. He would have to work. He would have to pay his own bills. He would have to face consequences. Instead, prosecutors said he created another plan. At trial, the state introduced a notebook found in the room where Joel Jr. had been staying. Prosecutors argued that the handwritten notes were not random thoughts. They were a plan. Steps connected to murder, cleanup, evidence destruction, and money. The language in the notebook was so important that prosecutors made it part of the emotional center of the trial. It was not simply a list of supplies. It was presented as evidence of intent. One line referenced money. Prosecutors emphasized the idea that Joel Jr. believed if his parents were gone, the money would be his. This is why the case was not just about rage. It was about premeditation. The state's argument was simple. He did not come home and suddenly lose control. He planned for the weekend. He purchased materials. He wrote instructions. And then, when his family gathered for Thanksgiving, he behaved in ways that some relatives later remembered as strange. Thanksgiving was supposed to be the last family holiday in that house. Prosecutors said Joel Jr. had already decided it would be the last for another reason. On Thanksgiving Day, November 24th, 2016, family gathered at the Golden View Lane home. Relatives later testified that Joel Jr.'s behavior felt unusual. One family member remembered that he was more talkative than expected. He interacted more than usual. He helped bring down boxes of old belongings from upstairs. He even gave away toys and games to younger family members. In isolation, none of that proves anything. Families remember strange details after a tragedy because they search the past for warning signs. But at trial, these memories became part of the larger timeline. Another detail stood out. One witness remembered seeing large blue totes in Joel Jr.'s vehicle. At the time, it may not have meant much. After the crime scene was discovered, it became deeply significant because investigators would later connect blue containers to the attempted disposal of remains. Thanksgiving itself passed with family present. Joel Sr., Lisa, Joel Jr., and relatives were all together. There was food, conversation, and the appearance of a normal family holiday. But prosecutors said the normal surface hid an already existing plan. The next day, Friday, November 25th, Joel Sr. was still alive. He spoke with family members by phone. He mentioned plans involving Surgensville and the move. He and Joel Jr. also moved a boat from the Knoxville residence. That detail matters because it helps narrow the timeline. It suggests Joel Sr. was alive after Thanksgiving Day, and that Joel Jr. was still with him as the weekend unfolded. Then, the ordinary timeline stops. By Monday, Lisa would not arrive at work. Deputies would be sent to the home, and everything that had looked like a family holiday would be reinterpreted through the evidence found inside the house. The notebook changed the way the case looked. A murder scene can show what happened. A notebook can suggest what someone intended before it happened. Inside the room where Joel Jr. had stayed, investigators found handwritten notes. Prosecutors argued these notes read like a plan. Steps for killing, dismembering, cleaning, destroying evidence, and controlling what would happen afterward. At trial, the prosecution called it the Book of Premeditation. That phrase mattered because premeditated murder is not only about the final act. It is about the decision made before the act. It is about planning, reflection, and intent. The state used the notebook to argue that Joel Jr. had thought about the crime before Thanksgiving weekend and that the supplies found in the home were not random household items. The notebook also connected to shopping trips. Surveillance footage and receipts showed Joel Jr. purchasing items at multiple stores before the murders. Prosecutors pointed to blue totes, chemicals, knives or blades, cords, sprayers, and other materials. Some of these purchases were made in Louisiana before he drove to Tennessee. Others were connected to stores around the time of the crime. The list and the purchases became a chain. A note in the notebook, a receipt, a surveillance video, an item found in the house. Then another note, another purchase, another piece of evidence. This is what made the case so strong for the prosecution. They did not have to rely on one single dramatic clue. They had a pattern that seemed to move from planning, to buying, to carrying out, to attempting to erase. And the more jurors heard, the more the defense had to confront the same question. If Joel Jr. did not plan this, why did so many pieces of the plan appear before the crime? The notebook changed the way the case looked. A murder scene can show what happened. A notebook can suggest what someone intended before it happened. Inside the room where Joel Jr. had stayed, investigators found handwritten notes. Prosecutors argued these notes read like a plan. Steps for killing, dismembering, cleaning, destroying evidence, and controlling what would happen afterward. At trial, the prosecution called it the Book of Premeditation. That phrase mattered because premeditated murder is not only about the final act, it is about the decision made before the act. It is about planning, reflection, and intent. The state used the notebook to argue that Joel Jr. had thought about the crime before Thanksgiving weekend and that the supplies found in the home were not random household items. The notebook also connected to shopping trips. Surveillance footage and receipts showed Joel Jr. purchasing items at multiple stores before the murders. Prosecutors pointed to blue totes, chemicals, knives or blades, cords, sprayers, and other materials. Some of these purchases were made in Louisiana before he drove to Tennessee. Others were connected to stores around the time of the crime. The list and the purchases became a chain. A note in the notebook, a receipt, a surveillance video, an item found in the house. Then another note, another purchase, another piece of evidence. This is what made the case so strong for the prosecution. They did not have to rely on one single dramatic clue. They had a pattern that seemed to move from planning, to buying, to carrying out, to attempting to erase. And the more jurors heard, the more the defense had to confront the same question. If Joel Jr. did not plan this, why did so many pieces of the plan appear before the crime? If the notebook showed the plan, the surveillance videos showed the preparation. Investigators traced purchases across multiple stores. In Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and later in Tennessee, Joel Jr. was seen on video buying items prosecutors said were connected to the crime scene. Surveillance footage is powerful in true crime because it removes imagination. The viewer does not have to picture a suspect preparing. The camera shows an ordinary person walking through a store, choosing items, paying, and leaving. At the time, nothing about it looks dramatic. But later, every movement becomes evidence. According to the appellate opinion and trial summaries, investigators connected Joel Jr. to purchases at places like Ace Hardware, Home Depot, Academy Sports, and Walmart. The items included containers, chemicals, tools, and other supplies, prosecutors said, matched what was later found inside the home. One of the most important purchases involved blue tote containers. A witness remembered seeing totes in Joel Jr.'s vehicle during the Thanksgiving gathering. Surveillance footage also showed him buying blue containers days before the murders. That is the kind of detail jurors remember. A person can explain away one strange item. They can explain away one receipt. But when a notebook, a witness memory, a surveillance clip, and the final crime scene all point toward the same object, the explanation becomes harder. The prosecution used the shopping evidence to build a timeline of intent. This was not a case where investigators only found evidence after the crime. They found evidence before it. Receipts, video, and store cameras created a trail that started days and weeks before Thanksgiving weekend. Had stayed, investigators found something that would become one of the most important pieces of the trial. A backpack with a notebook. This case is often discussed because of its forensic details, but the strongest way to tell it is not to chase shock. The facts are disturbing enough. The medical and forensic testimony showed that Joel and Lisa Guy suffered fatal sharp force injuries. Investigators also found that their bodies had been dismembered and that corrosive chemicals had been used in an attempt to destroy evidence. That is the forensic reality of the case. But in a documentary, the point is not to exploit the horror. The point is to explain what the evidence proved. The injuries helped establish the violence of the attacks. The condition of the scene helped establish that someone had spent time after the deaths attempting to conceal what happened. The tools, chemicals, containers, and handwritten notes helped connect the physical evidence back to preparation. The prosecution did not need the jury to imagine a monster. They needed the jury to see a sequence: preparation, attack, dismemberment, attempted destruction of evidence, departure from the home, and later, arrest in Louisiana. Forensic witnesses helped the jury understand the difference between chaos and planning. A chaotic scene can be random, but when the items in the scene match items purchased earlier, and when the notebook includes steps that resemble what investigators found, the scene becomes part of a larger design. That is why the forensic testimony mattered so much. It did not stand alone. It supported the state's theory that the crime was planned, carried out, and then partially abandoned when Joel Jr., left the house and returned to Baton Rouge. After the killings, Joel Guy Jr. did not remain in Knoxville. He returned to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where he lived. But the investigation moved quickly. Once deputies discovered the scene in Knoxville and began connecting items, receipts, and surveillance footage, law enforcement focused on him. According to court records, Joel Jr. was taken into custody outside his Baton Rouge apartment on November 29, 2016. Investigators searched his vehicle. In the trunk, they found items including gasoline cans, a mixing bowl, kitchen appliances, and a meat grinder. The search of his apartment and vehicle became part of later legal arguments, but the appellate court ultimately affirmed the convictions. This part of the story is important because it shows how the case expanded across state lines. The crime scene was in Tennessee. The suspect lived in Louisiana. Some of the purchases were made in Louisiana. Some store videos came from locations outside Tennessee. Investigators had to connect a timeline that stretched from Baton Rouge to Knoxville and back again. For the audience, this is where the story becomes a map. Louisiana, purchases, apartment, vehicle, arrest. Tennessee, Thanksgiving, the family home, the murders, the crime scene, the trial. And between those locations, a drive that prosecutors said carried Joel Jr. toward a crime already planned. By the time he was arrested, the case against him was no longer just suspicion. It was becoming a documented trail. Testimony, receipts, surveillance, physical evidence, forensic evidence, and the notebook. Joel Guy Jr.'s trial began in September 2020 in Knox County, Tennessee. The state's case was heavy with evidence. Prosecutors presented family testimony about retirement and financial support. They presented the notebook. They presented store receipts and surveillance videos. They presented testimony from investigators, crime scene technicians, forensic experts, and the medical examiner. The defense faced a difficult task. They did not need to prove who killed Joel and Lisa Guy. They needed to create reasonable doubt about whether the state had proven Joel Jr. committed the crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. In opening statements, the defense was brief. The defense asked jurors to listen carefully, consider the evidence, and hold the state to its burden of proof. But the prosecution's evidence was layered. A normal family holiday, a financial cutoff, a notebook, purchases before the murders, blue containers seen by a witness, surveillance videos, the crime scene, the forensic evidence, the return to Louisiana, and the arrest. At trial, prosecutors argued that this was not a mystery without a center. Joel Jr. was the center. He had the motive, the opportunity, the connection to the purchases, the connection to the home, and the connection to the written plan. The defense did not call witnesses on his behalf. Joel Jr. did not testify. When the state rested, the jury had to decide whether the chain was complete. And for the prosecution, the closing argument gave them one more chance to bring all of those pieces together. On October 2, 2020, the jury reached its verdict. Joel Michael Guy Jr. was found guilty on all 7 counts. The convictions included first-degree premeditated murder charges and abuse of a corpse charges. The verdict confirmed that the jury accepted the state's theory, that Joel Jr. had murdered his parents and then attempted to destroy and conceal what he had done. For the family, the verdict was not a victory in the normal sense. Nothing about this case could feel like victory. Joel and Lisa were gone. Their retirement never happened. The family home became a crime scene. Thanksgiving became permanently tied to trauma. But the verdict did bring legal certainty. The evidence had been heard. The jury had deliberated. And the person responsible, according to the court, was their own son. That is one of the reasons this case continues to disturb people. It is not only the forensic evidence, it is the betrayal. Joel and Lisa had supported him for years. They had given him money, a place in the family, and a connection to home. When that support was about to end, prosecutors said he did not respond with anger alone. He responded with planning. The verdict was the moment the case moved from accusation to conviction. But the courtroom was not finished yet. There were still victim impact statements. There was still sentencing. And there was still the judge's final response to what the evidence had shown. Sentencing in this case was severe. Joel Guy Jr. received 2 consecutive life terms for the murders of his parents, along with additional time connected to the abuse of corpse convictions. The total effective sentence was 2 life sentences plus 4 years. During sentencing, the judge described the crimes in extremely harsh terms. The court made clear that the brutality of the scene, the planning, and the attempt to dispose of the bodies weighed heavily. The case did not end entirely with sentencing. Joel Jr. appealed, challenging issues including searches, evidence, and the abuse of corpse statute. In 2023, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the judgments of the trial court. That means the conviction stood. The legal process took years. The crime in 2016, the trial in 2020, and the appellate decision in 2023. But the emotional reality for the family began the moment Lisa did not show up for work and deputies entered the house. Court cases turned tragedy into records. Counts, motions, exhibits, objections, jury instructions, appellate issues. But behind every legal document were two people, Joel Sr. and Lisa. They were parents preparing to retire. They were selling their house. They were planning to move. They were trying to begin the next chapter of their lives. Instead, the person prosecutors said they had supported for years became the person who ended that future. And the motive, according to the state, was painfully ordinary. Money, dependency, and the refusal to accept being cut off. The Joel Guy Jr. case is remembered because of the shocking crime scene. But the deeper horror is simpler. It began with ordinary things: a family holiday, a retirement plan, a house being sold, parents telling an adult child that financial support could not continue forever. Those are not unusual conflicts. Families have difficult conversations about money every day. Parents set boundaries. Adult children are forced to become independent. People get angry, embarrassed, or afraid. But almost no one responds the way prosecutors said Joel Guy Jr. did. That is why the notebook became such a powerful symbol in the trial. It turned the crime from something chaotic into something planned. It suggested that the violence was not just emotional, it was strategic. The prosecution showed jurors a chain of evidence: the financial motive, the handwritten notes, the store purchases, the surveillance videos, the crime scene, the forensic findings, and the arrest. Each link mattered. Together, they told the story of a man who wanted the benefits of his parents' support without the responsibility of adulthood. Joel and Lisa Guy did not live to enjoy retirement. They did not get to move into the home they had planned for. Their last Thanksgiving in the Knoxville house became the final chapter of their lives. For investigators, the case was unforgettable. For jurors, it was a disturbing set of facts they had to examine carefully. For the family, it was a permanent wound. And for anyone watching from the outside, the lesson is not that evil always arrives looking dramatic. Sometimes it arrives at Thanksgiving. Sometimes it sleeps in the guest room. Sometimes it brings a notebook. And sometimes the person who knows exactly where everything is in the house is the same person who should have been trusted most.